called me the Milwaukee Cannibal, the Milwaukee Monster, names that reduce what happened to simple horror. But the truth is never simple. Horror never emerges from nowhere. My name is Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer. Between 1978 and 1991, I murdered 17 men and boys. I dismembered them. I kept parts of them. I consumed parts of them. I tried to turn some of them into zombies. This is my confession. I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on May 21st, 1960, to Lionel and Joyce Dahmer. A normal birth, a normal baby. There were no signs, no omens, nothing to suggest what I would become. My early childhood was relatively stable. My father was a chemist who worked long hours. My mother, she struggled with her nerves. She took a lot of prescription medications during her pregnancy with me and after. There were tensions in the house, arguments I didn't understand as a child. We moved to Bath, Ohio, when I was about 8 years old. That's where things began to change for me. My mother was pregnant with my brother David, and she became increasingly anxious, depressed. My parents fought constantly. I remember feeling incredibly alone during this time. I was always a quiet, somewhat awkward child. I had difficulty connecting with others my age. While other kids were playing sports or games, I became fascinated with dead animals. Not killing them, that came later, but what happened to them after they died. I would collect roadkill from nearby roads and take them into the woods behind our house. I'd dissect them, examining their insides, their bones. I preserved some in jars with formaldehyde that I'd taken from my father's chemistry supplies. I told myself it was scientific curiosity. In some ways it was. My father, being a chemist, initially encouraged this interest. He showed me how to properly clean and preserve animal bones. He thought I might become a scientist like him. He didn't realize this wasn't normal childhood curiosity. This was something else. By high school, I was drinking heavily. Vodka, mostly, smuggled in a thermos to school. I was drinking before, during, and after classes. No one seemed to notice. Or if they did, they didn't care enough to intervene. I had few friends. I became known for my bizarre behavior, mimicking epileptic seizures or cerebral palsy in the school hallways. It got laughs. It got attention. It was the only way I knew how to connect. But inside, I was increasingly consumed by disturbing fantasies. I began to associate sex with death, with control, with possession. I couldn't articulate these feelings. I didn't understand them myself. But they were becoming stronger, more insistent. My parents' marriage was disintegrating. When I was 18, they finally divorced. My mother took my brother and moved away. My father temporarily moved in with his parents. I was left alone in the house, alone with my thoughts, alone with my fantasies, alone with my growing compulsions. Three weeks after my high school graduation, on June 18th, 1978, I picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks. He was 18, good-looking, on his way to a rock concert. I invited him back to my house for a beer. We drank, we talked. When he said he needed to leave, something snapped inside me. I didn't want him to go. I wanted him to stay, forever. I struck him with a dumbbell. I strangled him. I felt a rush of power, unlike anything I'd experienced before. This wasn't like my fantasies. It was real. Later, I took his body to the crawl space beneath the house. I dissected him there, similar to how I dissected animals. I buried the remains in the woods behind our house. But weeks later, I dug up the remains, stripped the flesh from the bones, dissolved it in acid, and smashed the bones with a sledgehammer, scattering them in the woods. My first killing was disorganized, impulsive. But something had awakened in me. Something that would sleep for nearly a decade, but never truly disappear. After Stephen, I briefly attended Ohio State University. I failed out after 1 quarter. My drinking was out of control. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't connect. My father convinced me to join the Army. I served as a combat medic in Germany for 2 years. I was trained to save lives, even as I harbored thoughts of taking them. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was honorably discharged in 1981 due to my alcoholism. In the Army, I managed to control my violent urges. The structure, the discipline, it helped, temporarily. But the fantasies never left. They were always there, waiting. After my discharge, I lived with my grandmother in West Allis, Wisconsin. For a time, I tried to be normal. I got a job. I even briefly attended church with my grandmother. I kept my drinking under control, somewhat. I remember sitting in church, surrounded by people speaking of redemption, of forgiveness, of a loving God. I wondered if there was redemption for someone like me, someone with the thoughts I had. I wanted to believe there was a way back to normalcy. But in 1985, the compulsions returned. I began frequenting gay bathhouses in Milwaukee. I would drug men and molest them while they were unconscious. I was arrested for indecent exposure in 1986, then for disorderly conduct in 1988. The fantasies were growing stronger. I no longer just wanted to possess someone temporarily. I wanted something permanent. Nine years after Stephen Hicks, I killed again, Stephen Tuomi, at the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee. I picked him up at a bar. We went to my hotel room. I awoke the next morning to find him dead, his chest crushed. I apparently beat him to death in an alcoholic blackout. I purchased a large suitcase, placed his body inside, took it to my grandmother's basement. I dismembered him there, disposed of him in the trash. This killing reignited something in me, a hunger that would not be satiated. 2 months later, in January 1988, I met James Duxtatter, a 14-year-old Native American boy, outside a gay bar. I lured him to my grandmother's house with an offer of money for nude photos. I drugged him, strangled him, dismembered him. In March, Richard Guerrero. The same method, the same outcome. I was developing a pattern, a ritual. I would meet young men at gay bars or other locations. I would offer them money for nude photos or sexual encounters. I would bring them to my grandmother's house. I would drug them, usually with sleeping pills crushed in alcohol. I would strangle them. I would perform sexual acts with their corpses. I would dismember them, often photographing each stage of the process. After my grandmother complained about strange smells coming from the basement, I moved into an apartment on North 24th Street. In September 1988, I met 13-year-old Laotian Kason Synthasamphone. I drugged him and molested him, but he escaped. I was arrested and charged with sexual assault. I pleaded guilty, claiming that I had mistaken his age. I was sentenced to 1 year in a work release camp and 5 years probation. I convinced the judge that I needed therapy, not prison. I was released after 10 months for good behavior. During this time, I didn't kill. I couldn't. But the fantasies continued to build. In May 1990, I moved into apartment 213 at the Oxford Apartments on North 25th Street. 1 week later, I met Raymond Smith at a bar, brought him home, drugged him, strangled him, dismembered him. I kept his skull, painted it gray to make it look like a plastic model. June 1990, Edward Smith. July, Ernest Miller. In September, David Thomas. The cycle accelerated. The need grew stronger. I was killing approximately once every few weeks. I began to experiment. With Ernest Miller, I tried a new method, slashing his carotid artery while he was drugged. I kept his biceps in the freezer, his heart in the refrigerator. I consumed parts of his flesh. I was evolving. The killings were no longer just about possession. They were about complete absorption. I wanted my victims to become part of me, literally. I wanted them to stay with me forever. In February 1991, Curtis Straughter. In April, Errol Lindsay. With Lindsay, I attempted something new. I drilled a hole in his skull while he was drugged but still alive. I injected hydrochloric acid into his brain. I was trying to create a permanent submissive companion. A zombie who would never leave me. It didn't work. He died, and I dismembered him like the others. I tried the same procedure with several subsequent victims. It never worked. They always died. But I kept trying. By the summer of 1991, I was completely consumed by my compulsions. May, Tony Hughes, a deaf and mute man. The only victim I felt something approaching genuine affection for. But a mere week later, I met Conorak Synthesophone at a mall. The brother of the boy I had molested 3 years earlier. A terrible coincidence. I took him home, drugged him, drilled into his skull, injected acid. I left him on my bed while I went out to buy more alcohol. When I returned, Konarak had somehow managed to escape the apartment. He was disoriented, naked, bleeding. Neighbors called the police. When officers arrived, I convinced them that Konarak was my 19-year-old boyfriend who had simply had too much to drink. They returned him to my apartment. As soon as they left, I killed him. July 1991, Matt Turner, Jeremiah Weinberger, Oliver Lacey, Joseph Braidhoft. 4 killings in just 2 weeks. My apartment had become a chamber of horrors. I had multiple dismembered bodies stored in acid-filled drums, severed heads in the refrigerator, a complete human skeleton mounted on my wall, preserved genitalia, photographs documenting the dismemberment. The smell in the summer heat was overwhelming. Neighbors had complained multiple times. On July 22nd, 1991, Tracy Edwards, a 32-year-old African-American man, agreed to return to my apartment for nude photos. I handcuffed him, but he grew suspicious. There was a foul odor in the apartment, a blue barrel in the corner, boxes of hydrochloric acid, male nudes on the wall. I threatened him with a knife, told him I would eat his heart. For 5 terrifying hours, he remained in my apartment, looking for an opportunity to escape. Finally, he saw his chance. He punched me, ran out the door, flagged down police officers. The officers returned with Edwards to my apartment. When one of them opened the refrigerator and found a severed head, I was wrestled to the ground and arrested. The investigation revealed the full extent of my crimes. 7 skulls, 2 human hearts, an entire torso, various dismembered limbs and organs, a collection of preserved genitalia, Photos documenting the dismemberment of my victims. A total of 17 murders over 13 years. My trial began in January 1992. I pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Despite evidence of my severe mental disorders, borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, psychosis, the jury found me sane and guilty on 15 counts of murder. I was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms, a total of 957 years in prison. On November 28, 1994, while performing assigned work detail, I was beaten to death by a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver. I was 34 years old. My name is Jeffrey Dahmer, and I did it.